Right, the title of my presentation is Award-Winning Irish Police Rescues. Back in 1922, when the independent Irish state was founded, a police force was founded as well, an unarmed police force. Now, back in 1920s, Ireland was a very dangerous place for a police officer. The IRA had just won the War of Independence against the British and had then lost a civil war against the newly formed National Army. The country had a lot of angry young men who had easy access to guns and were well practiced at using the guns, shooting to kill. So it's no surprising that when a gallantry award was introduced, the Scott Medal in 1924, the first medals were awarded to police officers who were involved in armed crime. It's not until we get to the actual 9th and 10th medals that we get medals being awarded for non-armed action, in other words, for rescues. And in fact, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th consecutive medals were all awarded for rescues involving drowning. Now, in looking at Garda rescue reports, it is quite clear that right from the establishment of An Garda Síochána, when it came to persons who were either drowning or who were trapped inside of burning buildings, the Irish public had a clear expectation that the police officer on the ground would attempt to rescue. Now, there's nothing in regulations that requires a police officer to attempt to rescue. As I said, it's quite clear from the recorded actions of police officers that they accepted this unofficial rescuer role and in fact have performed it with distinction. Now, the first award of a Scott Medal for a rescue, because it had followed many armed awards for armed action, that it had to be something particularly spectacular, and it was. And here's an outline of what actually happened. This is Killala Bay in County Mayo on a lovely sunny day. And a rescue took place in Killala Bay in 1926. The Danish bark sign was at anchor in Killala Bay. It was waiting for a tide high enough to allow it to cross the sandbars and to enter Killala Harbour. During the night, an Atlantic storm, the end of a hurricane, struck Ireland, all along the west coast of Ireland. The anchor chains that were keeping sign in the bay broke, and she was blown onto a sandbar in Bartra Island. And this is Bartra Island on a lovely sunny day, and you can see the sand, particularly see the sandbanks here. So the storm blew the boat, or the ship, it was a ship, onto a sandbank, but not close enough for the crew to evacuate the ship in the storm, and distress rockets were fired. And the rockets were seen by the local people, and a message sent to the local police station saying that there was a boat or a ship in trouble. Now, the local police officer was Sergeant John Kelly, and he phoned for a lifeboat. But he was told that all available lifeboats had already been launched, and that it was likely to be at least 12 hours before a lifeboat would be available. And he knew that by then the storm would have literally sunk the ship, destroyed the ship, and therefore he decided to act. Now, he was assisted by a Garda. There was just two of them there, the sergeant and the Garda, in a small police station named M.J. Kelly, and he sent Garda M.J. Nolan. Garda Ellis, my apology. He sent Garda Ellis to see what help he could find. So Garda Ellis came back, and he came back with 8 volunteers. Meanwhile, Sergeant Kelly had gone down to the boat cove to see what he could find, and all he could find were 2 old rowing boats, because knowing that a storm was coming, the fishermen had removed all their boats to safety. And he was left with 2 old rowing boats, and one of them had a hole in it. So improvising, Sergeant Kelly got a piece of turf. This is a piece of turf, and I've given was here, piece of peat, and he used it to block the hole in the bow of the boat. Now this is thousands of year old trees. When it soaks, it swells, and it swells sufficiently to block the hole. In a storm, this is a piece of peat. In a storm, they launched the boats. 8 male volunteers, 2 Gardaí, 4 men rowing in each boat, and the Garda bailing. Now this was into a storm. No life jackets, no lifeboats available, all men knowing that if they got into trouble themselves, they were on their own. And so they launched the boats. They rowed for 2 hours in the storm until they reached the large sandbank. They then walked for an hour across the sandbank to where the sign was beached. They had been in the storm for 3 hours by this time, in the dark. When they reached the storm, using flashlights to communicate with the ship, they found out that there were 8 men on board, that a grappling hook had been fired by rockets for a breeches buoy onto the sandbank, but in fact, the hook had failed to hold in the sand, had been dragged out into the water. And so Sergeant Kelly, heading off by himself, waded out into the water, and for 30 minutes waded up and down in the storm, sometimes chest high, searching with his feet for the hook and rope. He found the hook and the rope and brought them on board onto the sandbank. They were now 4 hours into the rescue. There was no place to actually anchor the rope, so the men used their bodies as a human anchor and put tension on the rope sufficient to allow the breeches buoy to be used, and all 8 crew members were successfully evacuated from the ship. They then walked back along the sandbank to where the boats were, entered the boats and rowed for another 2 hours back in the storm to the starting place. The rescue took a total of 8 hours. No one died that night. Sergeant Kelly was awarded a gold Scott Medal, and Garda Ellis was awarded a silver Scott Medal, and this was the first time that 2 medals were awarded for the same event. Sergeant Kelly was promoted a number of times, eventually retiring with the rank of Superintendent in charge of the Wexford Police Division. And it's to Wexford we go for the next police rescue. Now what I've done here, because you can see this on film, I've put the full report there so that you can stop the video when you're watching it and just look at it, but actually I will highlight sections of it as we go through. The first individual swimming rescue award was awarded to Garda John O'Brien in Courtown Harbour, County Wexford, for a swimming rescue in 1927, and in fact the medal was awarded for 2 rescues at the same location 1 month apart. This was a drowning, a bathing incident, and it's important to note that in Ireland only 10% of all drownings are bathing incidents. Most drowning events occur where a person unexpectedly falls into the water, but this was actually a bathing incident. Sergeant Kelly had just finished the swim in Courtown Harbour, was drying and dressing himself when he noticed that there was a man in the water, unable to leave the water. There was a strong undercurrent, so Garda quickly undressed again, swam out to where the man was, but the man was panic-stricken. He struggled, making it very difficult for the Garda to effect a rescue, but he managed to get him ashore. 1 month later, similar location, there was a minister going, the Garda O'Brien was going for a swim, and there was a clergyman about to go swimming. Garda advised him not to swim. The advice was ignored. A situation similar arose where the clergyman could not leave the water. The Garda again made a swimming rescue. Again there was a struggle, but a rescue was effected. Now, I want you to know two things because this is important. Both men wanted to be rescued, but both men struggled, resisted being rescued. The next rescue was by Garda David Hannon. It was in Dunleary Harbour in 1927. These are all the same year, more or less. And it was a Silver Scott Medal, and it was the first medal awarded for the rescue of a person who was attempting to die by suicide. This is Dunleary Harbour as it was at that time. This is the report, and I'll just show you excerpts from it. Garda Hannon saw a young girl fling her hat and her handbag on the ground and deliberately enter the water. There was no question that she was deliberately trying to kill herself. In spite of that, in full uniform, and this was a heavy woolen uniform, he jumped in to save her. She put up a desperate struggle against the Garda attempts to rescue her, but he successfully removed her from the water, and in the report afterwards it was stated that the girl was mentally ill. The next there is a point here which I want to make, and that is that if stopped beforehand or if rescued and treatment is provided, in over 80% of the cases, persons who attempt suicide go on to live full, successful lives. It's not a permanent state, being suicidal. It's a temporary condition. The next rescue was for a Garda named Garda Manning, and again it was a suicidal rescue. He saw a woman throw herself into the River Liffey in Dublin. Again, he knew exactly that it was a suicide. And once again, he immediately plunged in, but the woman fought strenuously against his efforts to keep her above the waves. So again, there was a struggle. And again, it emerged that the woman was mentally ill. Now, there's something you need to understand. In Ireland in the 1920s, suicide was not only socially unacceptable, it was a crime, and the Catholic Church would refuse to allow the burial of the person in consecrated ground. So therefore, in many cases, a verdict of the person was mentally ill was returned as a way of allowing what would have been called a Christian burial. Often it is the fact that the person struggles is used as clear evidence that the person did not want to be rescued. That's why I pointed out in the first rescues with Garda O'Brien when he was in Courtown Harbour, the men who were accidentally drowning resisted. All that can be said is that people who are drowning often clutch or often struggle with the rescuer. It cannot be taken or inferred from it that the person does not want to be rescued. It's just a warning for all rescuers that there may be panic-stricken or there may be resistance. And here again is suicide is illegal. All casualties can struggle. But since 1922, over 2,000 people have been rescued by drownings by Irish police officers. And what's also clear is that, as you've seen, the police officers don't make a distinction between whether the drowning is suicidal or accidental. In most cases, they have an idea, but in all cases, they still attempt a rescue. They don't make a distinction. This is a rescue that's sort of the next one that covers quite a number of common aspects of rescues. This is again in Dublin, and the Garda was Garda Comiskey. A man had jumped into the River Liffey. Garda Comiskey was on patrol in a car and he heard it. And he drove to the scene, and when he arrived at the scene, he found that a number of Gardaí were already present and they were attempting land-based rescues. Now, in Irish police stations that are close to water, it is quite common to have one or two officers who become the rescuers, the swimming rescuers. By accident or by fact that they are strong swimmers, they build up quite an experience in rescuing people, and it's not uncommon to have one police officer who has rescued 3, 4, 5, 6. I know of one guard who's performed 7 swimming rescues. And in those circumstances, it's not uncommon for police officers arriving at the scene to attempt land-based rescues while they know that the swimmer is on his way. So in this case, although it doesn't state so specifically about Garda Comiskey, I think it is likely that he was one of those people. He removed his clothing and he climbed down the ladder into the river. And here is a warning for all rescuers. The current and the cold defeated his best efforts, and he was forced to abandon the rescue. His legs and his arms became heavier as he swam back, and he barely made it back to the ladder and was helped to safety. A feature of police rescues, of Garda rescues, and I've been reading a lot of Garda rescue reports for many years, is that in many cases, the rescuer doesn't have to remove himself from the water. In fact, I first started looking at the potential of there being an exit problem in reading rescue reports by Garda officers where basically the rescuer, the casualty, had to be assisted from the water. And it made me think that in many cases where there is no bystander, no help on the bank, that the person may drown because they cannot exit the water. And again, it reported that he was suffering from hypothermia, from shock, and the beginnings of a stomach infection, and he was hospitalized for some days. So sometimes, even after the incident is over, there are consequences. I'm getting close to the end now. This is Garda Michael Collins, at the time Garda, and this is a most interesting report. Garda Collins was on duty when he was told that there was an incident happening in the local pier, and he went to the pier and he found that there were a number of people standing on the pier side that were shouting. There was a young man in an upturned boat just outside the pier. But no one was attempting to rescue him. But the young man's mother was present on the pier, and she pleaded with the police officer to do something. Now, the Garda was told that there was a rescue boat on its way, that it was 4 miles away, but it would eventually come. But in looking out, he saw that actually the boat was starting to drift away. And so he says in his report that he was not a good swimmer. Now, I want you to understand this was his determination, that he was not a good swimmer. And you can see whether or not he had made an accurate determination. He says, I was not a good swimmer, no life-saving skills. Concerned for the young man, he decided to make a swimming rescue. He found when he reached the boat that the young man said he couldn't swim. He was fully clothed. He was wearing Wellingtons, which are rubber boots. He was cold and he was exhausted. So the police officer who said that, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Concerned about the man's safety, he decided to tow the boat. It was upside down. There was a young man clinging to it, and he started towing the upturned boat. The young man panicked and decided that it was better for his life to leave go of the boat and to grab hold of the police officer, and both went underwater. The Garda towed the man back to the boat, resumed towing it. Then a wave washed him off the boat. The Garda dived, found him underwater, and returned him back to the boat. Exhausted and cold, this time the guard couldn't go any further, so he decided to wait with the boat. And by then, the people who were on the pier decided to do something. And some of the men swam. They towed the boat back to the pier. A doctor diagnosed cold injury, shock, and cuts as such. But here was a police officer, and quite a lot of times the police officer starts his report by saying, I am not a good swimmer. And still they go in. Now, this is Garda Collins. And if you look at him in the picture, I don't know if I've circled him. If you look at him in the picture, you'll see he's wearing 2 medals, because he was the first person to be awarded 2 Scott medals. Unfortunately, the second medal was awarded for an incident that did not have a happy ending. A report came in that a woman and 3 of her children were missing. Some bodies were spotted at the end of a cliff in a storm. There was no way of finding out without sending somebody down on a rope. So Garda Collins, who was then sergeant, had a rope tied around himself. He was lowered down the cliff, recovered the body of the mother, and then recovered the body of one of the children. The bodies of the 2 other children were never found. And as I say, he was the first police officer to be awarded 2 Scott medals. I've just finished. In recognition of the fact that the Gardaí had performed over 2,000 rescues, the inaugural Ireland medal was awarded to An Garda Síochána, and this is the picture of it. This shows our website, and on it there are film presentations where I make a number of presentations that outline specific rescues or events related to Garda rescues. And that's the end of my presentation.